every year that allows us to do this leadership lecture series. We have a very special person today, Mr. Preston Haskell, and you're going to learn a lot about him, his company, and how what he did, we try to model in some ways for our education with interior design, architecture, and construction, collaborating, sharing. We're just starting. We've got a long way to go, but he's going to give us a lot of clues. And I wanted to let the Construction Management Program Coordinator say a few words about how we got to meet Mr. Haskell. And so I'm asking her to step up. And it was a 3-year process, just so you know. It took 3 times. But Doris Kemp's going to tell you a little bit about Mr. Haskell.
I had the wonderful opportunity of meeting Mr. Haskell personally when I attended the Design Build Institute of America's conference in New Orleans a year ago. During kind of a lag time in between sessions, I went down to the main floor where everyone had booths, and I found the booth of Mr. Haskell's company. And so I'm talking to the person there, and I said, you know, I would love 5 minutes to speak with Mr. Haskell personally. He said, well, he just left. If you'll come back in about 15 minutes, he should be here. And I thought to myself, okay, you know, I'll spend some time and come back. And sure enough, I came back, and Mr. Haskell was there. So I had an opportunity to very quickly, and students, there's a lesson to be learned here, that 3-minute elevator pitch. Sometimes you have to do this. Here's who I am. Here's what we're all about. Here's what our school offers. We have a leadership lecture series, and we'd love to have you come speak. And we are just quite thrilled to have him here today. So, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here. And Doris, I'm glad that you gave me that 3-minute elevator speech, which led to my being here today. It's been a most informative and enjoyable morning. I am on a tight schedule, as Eric has mentioned, so I'll proceed immediately with my remarks, and we're leaving time for Q&A after my remarks up until about 2 o'clock. So, with that said, let me begin by saying how impressed I am with what you're doing here at the University of Mississippi, and particularly the programs which constitute the School of Design and Construction. Those 3 programs, of course, are the Architecture, Construction Management, Interior Design programs. Together they make up a very comprehensive, but not entirely, not 100%, but make up a very comprehensive set of courses, programs, and other activities which constitute the school and the majors from which you are involved. I'm also impressed by the leadership, both at the school level, the dean with whom I had lunch, the president, of course, who came and visited with us at breakfast this morning. And I was particularly impressed by his remarks, his comments from the podium, in which he reinforced his commitment to the school and the programs, and spoke of further improvements in physical plant and leadership in less tangible ways, but more important ways, in terms of his commitment to the programs in the school and what you're doing and the impact which it can have and will, I think, continue to grow and be responsible for a very important activity. At lunch, Dean informed me about the scope of the university, where its students come from, where its graduates go, and the impact which the university has not only upon the state of Mississippi, but the region beyond. So all of these are positive resources and developments which I think will bode well for the continued growth and success not only of the institution, but of its many students, faculty members, and administration. I'd like to discuss three things, or three important sets of things with you. The first being the state of the design and construction industry, and a little bit about design build, most important institution, the Design Build Institute of America, which of course is where I met Doris and others and learned about the University of Southern Mississippi, which led to my presence here today. Then I would like to give you a little insights into the Haskell Company and what we're doing. And that is significant not only as, I think, a good example of how the design build industry operates, but because of our relationship to University of Southern Mississippi, our recruitment here, our internship program in the summer, and our continued round-the-clock, round-the-calendar activities with you. When we develop relationships with universities, and there are about 10 of them in the U.S., with one or two exceptions in the eastern and southeastern region, which we recruit from, we don't just show up once a year for the job fair. We like to be involved with, on a year-round basis, what you're doing. We have a strong internship program. Many of you have been involved in our internship program, and other relationships with those institutions from which we recruit and develop a strong bond and lines of communication and action in both directions between our company and the institutions. And lastly, I will make a few suggestions reflecting my thoughts and ideas about the university, about the school and its programs going forward. As to the design and construction industry, I think most of you are aware of the fact that there really have been, are now, and have been over many years, three major delivery methods, project delivery methods within our industry. The first one that comes to mind, because for many years it was the largest and dominant project delivery method, and that is what we call design, bid, build. And that's the so-called traditional, although it's not so traditional anymore, in which architects and engineers prepare a complete set of documents, put them out for bids on price only, and then a selection of contractor is made based entirely, or almost always entirely, upon price and no other criteria. Secondly is construction management, in which the constructor, the construction manager, is brought into the design process, often selected at the same time that the architect or engineer is selected, provides input and guidance in terms of budget, cost, schedule, constructability, and other important inputs which make for a more significant project, because after all, the greatest intellectual value in the construction project delivery process occurs during design. That's when the important decisions are made which can affect cost, constructability, performance, and schedule going forward. Without that kind of input, the process is a very fragmented one which takes longer and costs more, and creates, in many cases, more problems and difficulties than those processes in which there is collaboration and integration during the design, during the pre-construction process. And then the third principal project delivery method now is design build. Design build, when I first started our little company 50 plus years ago, was a very small part of construction project delivery. Today, by most estimates, and depending upon what scope you include, meaning building, non-residential, residential, non-buildings, etc., but across all of those different sub-markets, design build is representative today of about 40%, up from single digits 25 years ago. Construction management is also in that neighborhood, and both of those have gained space in the industry at the expense of design bid build, which is as it should be. People are recognizing, owners, those who influence the procurement process, are recognizing that design bid build is a flawed system, and they are increasingly moving from that delivery method to construction management at risk, as well as agency construction management, and of course design build. So the industry has changed, and design build has been the leading factor in that change over the last 2 to 3 decades. And the institution which represents and promulgates design build in the United States is the Design Build Institute of America, DBIA. DBIA was founded about 25 years ago. Indeed, we recognized our 25th anniversary at the New Orleans conference last November, and began with an initial, I remember the very first 1993 meeting of the membership was held in a small hotel room, half the size of this one, at Chicago's O'Hare Airport in the summer of '93, and we had 25 people in the room. Today, we have membership of about 10,000, and that represents not just design build practitioners, those who deliver, but it also represents owners, those who procure, as well as academics and other affiliated professions as members of the institution. The programs which DBIA delivers are spread all across the United States. There are what we call regions, and then chapters within the regions, all of which are quite active and have programs and meetings and conferences of their own, which spread the word and indeed deliver the 3 things that DBIA, in broad terms, is responsible for and considers to be its principal purposes. And they are, number 1, to promulgate, to promote the use of design build as a delivery system. Number 2, and perhaps even more important, is to develop and disseminate best practices. Design build done wrong can give a bad name to the delivery method, and can result in some owners and other practitioners having less than full regard for that delivery method. But design build done right is a powerful and influential and successful delivery method. And as I mentioned, best practices is probably the thing that DBIA is most concerned with and most importantly delivers. We have and constantly update our manual of practice, the Design Build Manual of Practice. We have numerous conferences and programs in which those practices are promulgated and communicated, and it makes a big difference because so many of the design build practitioners today are former general contractors or construction managers, and they want to do design build delivery, but they want to do it right. And so DBIA constantly responds to that need, that desire for design build done right. best practices. And third is member services, which includes education and conferences and the many things which the institution, national scale and level, can do for its individual members. So DBIA is an important part of the industry, the environment for design build, and many of you have participated one way or another. You have a student chapter here, and I understand that it's popular and well managed, and I encourage all of you to seek affiliation or understanding or even membership in design build at the appropriate level, class of memberships, because it can be a great way of learning about the real world, of associating with others, practitioners, and others in the understanding of and delivery of design build projects. We often say that design build has 4 major advantages over other delivery methods. Number 1 is cost savings. Because design and construction are integrated, there's an opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, during the design phase to evaluate different alternatives, to test new ways of doing something, to compare. For example, most common example and really oversimplified one is concrete versus steel structure. But there are many, many more that delve more deeply and more in detail at other aspects of the project than just biggies like design, structural design in steel versus concrete. But every day during the pre-construction process, the design process, an understanding of both design and construction, the ability to test different methods for constructability and cost and schedule impact, and perhaps most important, performance impact of the completed project can best be accomplished during the design phase. And by having the input of both designers and constructors during that design phase, we can create a project which is not only a better performer, but a lower cost one. Number 2 is schedule or time savings. Because design and construction are overlapped, because there'll be fewer complications, issues, disputes, problems during the construction phase, construction can go faster, and the overall delivery time from the beginning of design to the completion of construction can be much shorter than those delivery methods in which those processes, those phases are separated. The third big advantage is singularity of responsibility. The owner, the client, has to look only to a single entity for performance of the completed project, for conformance with the initial program, expectations, prescription, whatever that was set forth by the owner at the beginning and during the design and construction process. So that there is certainty of outcome, there is a single entity to look to for performance. There's not the finger pointing between design and control. Oh no, that was his fault. I didn't do that. The architect specified that or left it out, and the owner winds up having to fund those gaps, those omissions, those errors that might have occurred between and caused friction and gaps between design and construction. And then the fourth big advantage is the reduced administrative burden upon the owner. And that can vary. Some owners want to be very involved in the process and be part of the detailed design. Others want to set forth their broad expectations and what they look for at the completion of the project to make sure that it conforms with their initial stipulations, expectations, prescriptions, and program. So the reduction in administrative burden on the part of the owner is present in all design-build projects, but the degree of that reduction can be at the owner's discretion, either a very small or a very significant reduction in cost and administrative involvement throughout the project. So those four: cost savings, time savings, singularity of responsibility and certainty of outcome, and various degrees of reduction in administrative expense during the process. So though that, I hope, gives you a little bit of a further insight, many of you already probably knew most of what I've just said, into the design-build process, and then I'll speak just a little bit about our company and how we practice design-build. Our company was founded over 50 years ago. In the early days, we began by doing construction. General contractors, as we were called in those days, but when I look back on it, what we were really doing was construction management at risk. Our earliest projects, we were, because of my previous background mostly in construction as opposed to design, we were selected early on in the process. In most projects, we came aboard either at the same time or even earlier than the architect was selected, and we worked with the architect in the design phase. So we were doing construction management, as it is called today. We just didn't know of it as formally by that name in 1960s when we first began. It wasn't long before I began doing design build, but using an outside architect. I'm an engineer myself, so I sort of oversaw much of the engineering side of the design build process, as well as overseeing the entire process. The outside architects and engineers whom we would engage for a particular project worked for us, a subcontractor, if you will, and the owner dealt strictly with the Haskell company, and in many cases had only limited communication with or involvement with the engineers and architects. Certainly we didn't seek to restrict that involvement, my point being that the owner saw a single entity as being responsible for the entire project delivery process. After about 5 years of doing construction management and design build with outside AEs, we began staffing internally and delivering almost all of our projects by design build using both disciplines, design and AE, under the same roof. And we were really leaders in that respect. There weren't very many others that were doing it. Other design builders over the years have been major construction companies who engage outside architects and engineers on a project-by-project basis. And while those entities and their projects have indeed been successful, I think greater success is achieved when you have all of the disciplines under a same roof working together. In our company, we traditionally, if you go back to those early years, we had engineering and architecture and construction and what we call project development, which is the front end, the selling, and then overseeing the design and construction process as separate departments, silos, if you will. In 1991, which would now be almost 30 years ago, we shifted our internal organization very significantly, probably the most significant organizational refinement in 55 years, and that was to create project delivery groups as opposed to the silos of architecture, engineering, and construction. And we today have 3 principal project delivery groups, one of which focuses upon industrial and process, one of which is institutional and government related, and the third of which is infrastructure, transportation, and water and wastewater projects. Each of those 3 project delivery groups is divided into, not divided, but has within it anywhere from 3 to 5 project delivery divisions which focus upon a more specific market like food and beverage, or post-secondary education, or aircraft projects, not airplanes themselves, but the facilities in which aircraft are built and manufactured and hangared. Or in the case of our infrastructure and water projects, we will have project delivery divisions which deal with water, wastewater, and transportation projects. But the important point about the project delivery organization is that instead of having silos from which architects or engineers, construction management is pulled on a project basis, these different disciplines work with one another constantly. And we have engineers, architects, and construction management working alongside one another. If you go into our buildings where we're located, you will see an architect in the office or the workstation next to an engineer or a construction manager. They repeatedly work on repeat assignments with particular clients. They develop a certain amount of community and comradeship amongst the people in those project delivery groups and divisions, so that they know each other from beginning to end. They don't just come together on a project by project basis, but are constantly involved and learning more about and working together to reinforce knowledge and understanding and experience within a particular market or building type. And also, 70% of our work is repeat projects for a single client. They become knowledgeable of that client, and the client becomes knowledgeable with them. They work from the proposal all the way to completion of the project. And there's a lot of camaraderie and commonality of objectives and achievements and knowledge within the project delivery divisions. We also have a number of regional offices, approximately 12 in addition to Jacksonville, which are spread out across the United States, also in Asia and the Philippines. And they are geographically, of course, dispersed, but they relate to the project delivery groups in that every regional office is generally under the general leadership and direction of a project delivery group. But not let's use an example, our industrial project delivery group may have 4 or 5 regional offices reporting to the head of that group, but that region is not limited to industrial work in my example, but can do work drawing upon the resources of all 3 project delivery areas, and becomes responsible to the project delivery leadership in terms of financial performance, but in terms of customer satisfaction, in terms of constantly improving in terms of our projects, is responsible to the leadership of the region and of the project delivery group. And several of our regional offices are referred to as centers of excellence because they may have developed a particular expertise. For example, Madison, Wisconsin, below it actually, the Center of Excellence is in pharmaceuticals and biopharmacy type projects. Close affiliation with the University of Wisconsin at Madison has made it a leader in pharmacy projects and project delivery. So there are other examples of centers of excellence where we seek to build expertise, experience, knowledge, and reputation within those particular fields of project delivery. In addition to, and then this will be sort of my final comment about our company, in addition to design build delivery, we do a certain amount of construction management in which we bring the same skills, the same knowledge of pre-construction or design involvement that a construction manager would. We usually limit construction management engagements to accommodation work, or if it's strategically important, if it's a client that we want to develop our relationship with to a greater degree and ultimately do design build work for that client, the route to that type of relationship often goes through construction management. So, but otherwise we design everything we build everything that we design. In recent years we have sought to, and some of this goes back many decades, to develop what I call Design Build Plus. And Design Build Plus means what other services can we add to both design build, and there are 3 or 4 things there. First one is what is known in the industry as EPC, Engineer, Procure, Construct. And EPC has historically been limited to very large projects such as petrochemicals and petroleum and power generation projects. Hundreds of millions of dollars, typical job size. 2 or 3 big companies, Fluor, Bechtel, KBR, 1 or 2 others have dominated that market. But we see EPC in what I refer to as the middle market. That is, things such as food and beverage, aviation facilities, and other production-related facilities in which performance is so important. And that by that, taking, for example, a beverage plant that does Coca-Cola or Anheuser-Busch beer or other wine, spirits, and beverages. It's important that the quality and the quantity of the project be specified up front, and we're held responsible not just for the 4 walls, but for everything that goes on within those 4 walls. And we indeed, in almost all cases, are tied to a performance guarantee, such as if the beverage plant is supposed to produce 10,000 cases per hour. If it only produces 9,500, it's our responsibility to get that production up to the specified level. And also quality, not just quantity, is defined as the expectation, indeed the commitment under the contract to produce not just the building and its 4 walls, what goes on within those 4 walls. So it's engineer, meaning that we engineer the building, but also the process equipment. Procure means procurement of the process equipment and its installation. And then, of course, C, construct, means constructing all of the buildings, but the process utilities, electricity, water, compressed air, steam, vacuum, all of the things that have to go into the machinery, the process equipment, to make it function are part of this overall package of EPC delivery. We also, for clients who want not to own their buildings but to lease them over a long term, we provide project finance and leasing. More recently, we have moved into what we're calling DMC or DMB, which is design, manufacture, and construct. And that is modularization, prefabrication, other components of the building and its contents that can be manufactured off-site and then brought to the site and assembled or constructed. And I think, and this is something that has been talked about for decades, but I think it's now beginning to really take hold. And we have the physical plant in which components can be constructed. We have a commitment to our clients and to ourselves to make off-site manufacturing a bigger part of the construction process. Because construction, as typically practiced, is subject to all of the hazards and conditions that putting together outdoors under weather restrictions and conditions and labor availability and all of the things that doing it one of a kind. You know, most projects are one of a kind, and certainly there are projects which can be duplicated and replicated one after another, but for the most part each project is simply one of a kind. We build it and then we go away and construct a project which is often quite different than the one we just finished. We seek to minimize those hazards and disadvantages of one of a kind and to bring greater speed, greater certainty of outcome, and greater quality and lower costs to the table by having the ability of what we call manufacturing. And the name manufacturing isn't ours alone. There's a large part of the industry in which design, manufacture, and build is done. And another, of course, that we hear a lot about, and I think it still has its ups and downs, and that is P3, or the program known as P3 is so common I can't remember what it stands for. But it's a program in which a single entity does design, construction, finance, that's why it's called P3, and operation. So that, and it's been somewhat successful in transportation projects, toll facilities, where a single entity will be responsible for the design and construction of the project, in this case a bridge or a highway segment, but also financing and operation. And in my example, tolls are under the control of the developer, and those toll income is used to pay the debt service on the debt which was incurred for the financing of the project in the first place. So P3 is another form of design build plus, which brings financing but also long-term operation of the facility into the single responsibility. Finally, let me say a few things about your programs here and some thoughts I might have, even some suggestions I might give as to the School of Construction and Design. You already have in place many interdisciplinary components. You are already providing and studying design and construction. in the construction program, the architecture program, the interior design program. And you're bringing together coursework and majors which cut across all three of those. I would suggest that in addition to those three programs, that you develop a program which is design build, and again which can draw upon the other programs within the school, but add some more coursework, which is and provide the leadership at the program level, which is specific to design build delivery. The one feature which you're lacking is engineering, because I think design build education should provide engineering as well as architecture and construction. In my discussions with the dean and others, know that a civil engineering program or coursework has been talked about over the years. It's not completely off the table. I hope very much that in due course you can put together, you've got all of the other features and the resources necessary to make civil engineering successful. There would, of course, have to be faculty recruitment and leadership for such a program. But you have essentially the characteristics and other features of the university which would, I think, make a civil engineering program desirable and successful, not just for design build reasons, but for civil engineering degrees, civil engineering accreditation, and professional licensing, as well as the contribution which such a program could make to a true design build major, a true design build program which focuses upon design build and has all of the components, engineering, architecture, and construction, which would make a highly visible and focused program in design build successful at the University of Southern Mississippi. Your university has already got so many strengths. Your dominance in this region, the reputation and respect which you enjoy outside of the university, the fact that you are of certainly the three major state universities, you're the dominant one in the hard sciences, in engineering, construction, and use that prominence and all of those resources to put together a design build program which would draw upon your existing strengths and hopefully a program in civil engineering which I think has a great many potential advantages in not only in the design build program but for the university as a whole, which is so focused upon the hard sciences and engineering and practicum, if you will, that civil engineering fits into it very, very logically. So, let me say how much I've enjoyed my day with you, how much we at the Haskell Company value our relationship to the university and particularly to the programs in which you are involved. We have enjoyed having many of you as interns in our summer intern program, which is a great way for recruitment. Indeed, I think of a summer intern program as being a 3-month interview, if you will. The interns get to know us and learn about us, and we learn about the programs much as you would in an interview. And it's significant that at the end of the summer or in the days and months following the summer that we offer permanent employment upon graduation to about 70% of those who intern with us. And about 70% of that 70% wind up coming to work for us a few months or a year later. And they're off to a great start because they're way ahead of someone who's just been recruited cold. And that internship program is an important part of our recruitment and personnel development process. So again, this has been a great experience for me. I'm glad to see firsthand some of the people and things that my colleagues have told me about the university and its programs, and I'm delighted to have had a chance to speak to you this afternoon. That said, we have about 15 minutes for Q&A, and I'll be glad to take any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
Quick question. First of all, thanks for sharing. I'm glad I stayed, and I think we owe a round of applause. Haskell, I'm a proud graduate of this program back in 1988, the construction program. And the last 20 years have developed my construction company and spread the footprint across the Southeast. And I really appreciate the way you took the time to explain the different delivery methods. But I do have two questions, and I'll get out of the way. Most recently, we've started getting involved in more design build related delivery methods with owners. First question I have is, what's your feedback on different states with their bid laws? How do you handle that and address that? How have you gotten around that, for lack of terminology? And I know design build has historically been on the private side and not necessarily the public side. And different states have different laws. And I do business in a lot of states, so I have a couple of issues that I've ran into over the years relative to that. And I like design build. I love the margins. The margins are much better than design bid build. And I want to get your feedback on that.
Yeah, two questions. First is design build procurement by public agencies. If you go back 20 or 30 years, it was almost non-existent. Florida was the first state to enact at the legislative level design build procurement, and it wound up being not only at the state and state agency level, but the legislature pushed that design build procurement authority down to municipalities and counties and school districts, so that we have in Florida very, very broad procurement authority for public agencies. And that has over the years spread to other states as well. DBI puts out a little map color-coded for the different degrees of design build procurement authority within those states. And Florida is bright green, and others may be yellow or red, depending upon where they are in the scope of design build procurement authority. Some limited to certain types of construction or certain size contracts. But it's growing. And DBIA and others are promoting design build procurement and following up. Doesn't accomplish a great deal simply to have the legislature enact a statute. We have to get into the practitioners, the executive branch agencies and their people to get them comfortable with design build procurement and managing those projects. So it's a gradual process. It's not something that can be dictated top down overnight, but something that takes a lot of work and follow-up to make sure that public procurement of design build is successful. The second question.
Actually, it was all in one, but I do have a second question, real quickly. It's more contract law related. I've been in scenarios wherein the contractual obligation is upon the contractor to contract with the owner in a design build setting versus more of a joint one. I know you mentioned one entity. Could you elaborate on what that one entity is? Do you see it most likely across the board as, and I've seen it a couple different ways. So I'm trying, from an expert like yourself, what is the correct way?
Well,
Is it just contract with the contractor, then the subcontract with the architect, or is it a
Yeah.
venture? I just want to get your opinion.
well, there are several different arrangements in our company, and a growing but minority part of our design build community. It's all under one roof. We will go outside when we need the expertise, which in a particular field, which we don't possess in-house, but most of our projects can be delivered using in-house engineers, architects, and construction managers. The largest amount of design build delivery today is done by well-established general contractors who have good relationships with outside architects and engineers whom they bring in on a usually subcontracted basis, and that contractor is the design builder, holds the contract with the owner, and has ultimate responsibility for the performance of its entire team.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes,
I
sir.
have a question. How did you initially persuade an architect to come work for you in-house? Besides money.
No. It wasn't easy. In the early days, design build was looked upon with disfavor by the architectural community. Indeed, the Jacksonville chapter of AIA, American Institute of Architects, would not admit as a member of the Jacksonville chapter an architect who worked for a design builder. And we had recruited architects from other parts of the country, and they arrived in Jacksonville and found out they couldn't be a member of AIA. So there was definitely resistance. We overcame that, however, as architects became excited about being involved in the total process and not just a very narrow, restricted portion of that process, and then they were kind of dismissed and did not enjoy the feedback, the participation in the construction side of things, or the collaboration with constructors that made their designs better. And I think that certainly there are the monetary rewards, but I think the satisfaction and pleasure of working in a more rewarding atmosphere that gave feedback, that gave recognition, that gave self-fulfillment to the designer that was not available when those designers, architects, and engineers were restricted to a very small role, a very small scope within the overall project delivery process. Yes, Joe.
So as a fellow engineer, I was pleased to hear that you are an engineer and you're obviously at the top of the organization or your company. So I was curious, in that environment of architects and engineers working together, you're not an AE firm, you're actually a design build firm, which is very interesting to me. At the top level of management, how does that shake out? Is it made up of CMs and architects, engineers, with all the backgrounds? How do they gravitate to the top of your organization in that environment?
I'll answer that really at two levels. At the project level, the key leader is known as the project director, and he or she has two major responsibilities. One is he or she is the principal contact to the owner, and while not responsible for all the details, but the major contractual relationship, the major decisions, the responsibility for client satisfaction lies with the project director. His or her second important and equally important responsibility is leadership of the team itself. That is bringing together on a project basis architects, engineers, and construction managers. At the top of the organization, and project directors usually have an architectural or engineering degree, have practiced architecture and or engineering within our company, but also have broad exposure to involvement in construction. They vary. We've got 40, 50 project directors throughout the company. Each is responsible for 2 or 3 or 4 projects, depending upon size and duration. And they vary in terms of what their education and experiential background with us is. We have approximately a 10-year pipeline, a program for the development of project directors, both by experience, that is where you work out on a project, on the drawing board. We don't have drawing boards anymore, but meaning the AE side of things, and ultimately also learning the business side of things. So project directors have backgrounds in all of the disciplines and come together those disciplines, those experiences come together in being named a project director, usually after about 10 years. Project director is also a route to top management, and our top management has, our COO has both civil engineering and MBA background. The heads of our project delivery divisions, 2 out of the 3 of them are engineers, the third one is an architect background. Our chief executive officer has a MBA as well as a construction management degree, been with us for 30 years plus, and has experience in all of the disciplines. So we seek, to answer your question, we seek to have multidisciplinary leadership at the project levels and also at the corporate level. We got time for a couple more?
You do,
Okay.
but I'm looking at 2 minutes to 12 too, because we do not.
Yeah, I got to catch an airplane.
That's the only reason. One more maybe?
Certainly.
Because we have something to give them before we leave, so we got to.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Mine's pretty simple, but I hear you talk a lot about civil engineers and architects and construction managers, but what kind of opportunities and how prominent are your interior designers within your company?
Good. Good question. We do have an interior design practice. It touches almost all of our projects to one degree or another. Some, like an office building or a healthcare project, would be more than an industrial plant. But it has offices which require interior design. So while it's not a big part of our practice, it's an important part of our practice. Let's have one more. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so last week, right before the career fair, we had a representative come in our studio class and speak to us about your company.
Yes.
And he mentioned that you have aspects such as the fact that you guys manufacture your own steel in a way, different sets of things that you guys do that are just personal to your company, so you don't have to go out and reach into another separate entity just to do it for yourself. So how do you feel that works and connects all together?
Well, we put a lot of value on self-performance, and having the craft personnel whom we train and develop and have programs and benefits for, separate than your typical construction hire, which is just for the duration of the project or even shorter. So we have strong self-performance in concrete and steel. We have our own steel fabrication plant of about 5,000 tons per year, and that's increasing every year. And the steel fabrication and the what we call permanent construction employees, PCEs, cut across all of our projects across the company. So we believe strongly in self-performance, and particularly have the steel fabrication, which can be a big part of a project, can influence schedule, and having steel on the job at the right time is often critical. And so we're able to respond programmatically, schedule-wise, and performance-wise by having self-performed capability in many parts of the company. Okay.
Thank you very much. We
All
have
right. Thank you.
Mr. Haskell also manufactures wine in South Africa, which we were going to try to surprise him with. But it's so rare, you had to go to Oregon to get it, and they're out. Instead, we've got you a little sign of our gratitude.
Oh, great.
We wanted to give to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you.
Southern Miss shirt that talks about our school. We'd like to give that with you, so whenever you're on the golf course, you can say you talked to that. So that's for you.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. And I now have the golf cart to take you to your car.
Okay, good. One minor correction. The South African winery is my son, not me.
He has the same name.
Yeah, that's the same name.
Okay, sorry. We should have called him.
Okay. Well, listen, I've had a great day with you, and I hope the rest of your day is enjoyable and productive.
Thank you so much.
Okay?
Put that